In the kitchen, I began by turning on the electric stove and setting the induction hob to cook some rice in the rice cooker. While the rice cooked, I prepped the vegetables using a chopping board and a paring knife to peel and chop them. The cleaver was perfect for chopping the tougher meat into smaller pieces. I placed the vegetables and meat into the frying pan on the gas stove and cooked them. As the dish simmered, I turned on the microwave to heat up some leftover soup. To season the dish, I measured out the spices using a measuring spoon and cup, adding a pinch of salt from the salt shaker and a bit of pepper from the pepper shaker. I stored the leftovers in a food container and wrapped some of them in plastic wrap for later use. I checked the refrigerator and freezer for any additional ingredients. Next, I decided to bake some muffins. I set the baking tray and muffin tin on the countertop. Using the rolling pin, I rolled out the dough and placed it in the cake tin. After baking, I removed the muffins from the oven with the help of an oven mitt and placed them on a cooling rack. Meanwhile, I prepared a fresh smoothie with the blender and whipped up some cream using the mixer. I then set the muffins on a serving tray and garnished them with chopped herbs using the chopping knife set. For a drink, I poured juice into a pitcher and added ice to glasses. To clean up, I placed the dirty dishes in the sink and scrubbed them with dishwashing liquid and a sponge. After drying, I placed the plates and utensils in the dish rack. I wrapped the remaining dough in aluminum foil for later use, wiped down the countertop with a kitchen towel, and stored the leftover flour in the pantry. As I prepared for the next meal, I checked the gas cylinder to ensure it was full and used a lighter to ignite the stove. The mortar and pestle were ready to grind fresh spices, and I added seasoning from the spice jar. I checked the drawer for an extra apron that I might need for the next round of cooking. After finishing, I cleaned up with a dish towel and set a fresh table with a tablecloth, ready for the next meal. In the kitchen, I was preparing for a big family dinner. First, I grabbed a cold drink from the fridge and placed it on the countertop next to the range hood. I began by washing the vegetables under the faucet, adjusting the tap to the right water temperature. I then placed the vegetables on the cutting board and used my chef's knife to slice them finely. I used the scissors to open some packages and quickly moved on to prepare the bread. The bread knife made slicing the loaf effortless, and I placed the slices on a saucer next to the table. For the soup, I used a ladle to scoop the liquid from the pot, stirring it with a spatula to prevent it from sticking to the bottom. I measured out some flour with a tablespoon and teaspoon, adding it to the bowl to prepare the batter. The whisk helped me mix everything together, and I used the peeler to peel potatoes for the side dish. Once the batter was ready, I set the baking sheet on the counter, transferred the mixture onto it, and placed it in the oven. The muffins baked beautifully while I moved on to make a fresh juice. Using the juicer, I poured the juice into a jug and served it with a few chopsticks and a fork on the side. For cleaning, I used a scrubber to remove grease from the stovetop, placed dirty dishes in the sink, and scrubbed them with dishwashing liquid and a sponge. I rinsed the pasta in a colander and sifted flour with a strainer. To store the remaining ingredients, I wrapped them in plastic wrap and placed them in a food container. Later, I heated water in the kettle for tea and kept everything organized in the kitchen cabinet and cupboard. As the dinner came together, I grabbed the pot holder to take the baking pan out of the oven. The dessert was delicious, and I made sure to pack up leftovers in a lunchbox and clean the counters with a napkin. Finally, I checked the gas cylinder for the next cooking session and lit it with a match as I cleaned the kitchen and prepped for the next meal. In the kitchen, I started by checking the fridge for fresh ingredients. I grabbed some vegetables and fruits and placed them on the countertop next to the range hood to keep the air clean while cooking. I turned on the faucet and adjusted the tap to wash the vegetables thoroughly. Then, I grabbed the cutting board and used my chef's knife to chop the vegetables into smaller pieces. For the bread, I used the bread knife to slice it and placed the slices on a saucer to serve. I used scissors to cut open the chicken packaging. Next, I grabbed the pot and saucepan to cook two different dishes at once. I boiled water in the electric kettle for tea while cooking rice in the rice cooker. For the soup, I used a ladle to pour the broth into the bowl and stirred it with a spatula to prevent it from sticking to the bottom. Meanwhile, I prepared a fresh fruit smoothie using the blender and food processor to chop the fruits into smaller pieces. I measured out ingredients for the batter with a tablespoon and teaspoon, adding them to the bowl. I mixed everything together with a whisk until smooth. Then, I grabbed the peeler to peel some apples for the topping and used the grater to finely grate some lemon zest. After that, I used a colander to drain the pasta and a strainer to remove pulp from the juice, which I poured into a jug. To bake, I lined a baking sheet with parchment paper and placed the dough on it, then transferred it into the oven preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. I also used the baking pan to make a cake. As the food baked, I cleaned up by scrubbing the countertops with a scrubber and stored any leftovers in a lunchbox, wrapping them in plastic wrap. I carefully removed the baking pan from the oven with a pot holder. Once everything was done, I sat down with a cup of tea using my mug and wiped my mouth with a napkin. For dessert, I lit a candle on the table with a match, making it feel like a special evening. I finished by packing everything away in the kitchen cabinet and cupboard, ensuring that the trash can was emptied. In the kitchen, I was preparing for a hearty breakfast for my family. I started by boiling rice in the pressure cooker, adding a bit of salt for flavor. While waiting for the rice to cook, I grabbed the wok and heated it up to stir-fry some vegetables and tofu for a delicious vegetarian dish. The tongs were perfect for flipping the tofu without breaking it, and I used the sieve to strain the noodles I was cooking on the side. As the stir-fry cooked, I used the toaster to crisp up some bread for toast and placed it on the table, ready to serve. I brewed fresh coffee using the coffee maker, making sure to grind the beans just right for the perfect cup. Once everything was ready, I used the rice scoop to serve the rice into bowls, and we all sat down to enjoy the meal. The combination of hot toast, fresh coffee, stir-fried vegetables, and perfectly cooked rice made for a satisfying start to the day.